In a world that's both more connected and more isolated than ever before, we're often tempted to do life alone, either because we're so busy or because relationships feel risky and hard. But science confirms what faith communities have always known, that consistent, meaningful connection with others has a powerful impact on our well-being. We are meant to live known and loved, but so many are hiding behind emotional walls that we're experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. Join us in this 4-week series to help you find your people.
When I was in college at East Carolina University, I was involved with a campus ministry, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Our community was small, but we were close-knit. I lived in campus housing the whole time I was enrolled at ECU, and even though I didn't have any close friends in my major, I frequently saw my friends while I was walking from my dorm to my classes. I met up with people in the cafeteria. We saw movies together at the student center. We had rec league sports teams. And I have spent my entire adult life trying to recreate the sense of community I experienced during those 3.5 years. It would be easy to look at those years and write them off. After all, they were probably the years where the ratio between freedom and adult responsibilities were the highest in my favor. I had all the freedom of an adult with very little real responsibility. I had a part-time job, sure. I had classes, sure, but I wasn't paying rent or buying groceries or worrying about things like insurance. Maybe that's why those years felt so sweet. Well, I'm sure that's one reason. But I also think that there was something else about those years that made them so special. I lived in a walkable community with about 15,000 people. And then I was part of a smaller community of people who shared some similar values. Last week, we talked about our social network. To have 5 best friends, we need to have a village of around 15 people, around 50 acquaintances, and a network of about 150 people. Those are the people that you talk to like once or twice a year. My village came from InterVarsity. My acquaintances and network, they came from InterVarsity and from other college peers. I had 5 close friends. I felt known, seen, accepted, loved, challenged in those years. There were hard moments for sure, and I can look back and see some places of my own immaturity that caused harm. But there was something unique about those years that I have been trying to recover ever since. Maybe you've experienced a unique season in your life that was rich in community too. Maybe it was high school or college like me. Maybe you spent summers at a camp living with a few dozen of your closest friends. Maybe you had seasons in a suburb like where all the families hung out together all the time. Maybe your family goes to a cabin every year and you feel a renewed sense of connection that sustains you over the following months. Let's take a minute and chat about that. Put it in the chat. Have you ever experienced a unique season of community? Yes or no? Talk about it. In the years that followed my college experience, my husband and I have both experienced an intense longing to recover that sense of close-knit community. We have started or led small groups. We did a prayer group to explore different kinds of prayer and practice them. We initiated vulnerable accountability conversations to foster connection in our friend groups. We began potluck groups to gather people around food. We brought Christmas gifts to our neighbors. Maybe you've done some of those things too. Maybe you hear me talking and you realize that you want to do some of those things. Maybe that desire is why you're listening in today. Last week, we introduced the idea from Genesis that it isn't good for humans to be alone. It's not good for us to be alone. Why? Because we are made from community, from the community of the Trinity, and for community. We're made for relationships, for connection. And even though my husband and I went to different schools, we both experienced a taste of that deep connection during our university years. And because of those experiences, we have consistently worked to establish some kind of close connection in every season of our lives because we've longed for it so deeply. This week, we're continuing our series. It's called Find Your People, based on a book of that same name by Jenny Allen. Now, Jenny Allen looks like someone who has it all together, right? She looks like she's like the leader of the cool kids in the youth group. For sure, she has a bunch of friends, and it's all come really easy to her, right? Except when she wrote this book, her friend group fell apart. And the lessons she shares in this book are ones she learned the hard way. Today, we're going to introduce some of the practices that Allen proposes as tools to help you connect to people in deeper ways. This is what she believes is necessary on the path to connection. Number one is proximity, transparency, accountability, purpose, consistency. This week, we'll be discussing the first three of those. And next week, we'll tackle numbers 4 and 5. I wonder how you're feeling when you see this all laid out. Are you excited to hear about this and look for ways to find your people? Or are you feeling less than hopeful? Holy jeez, every time I get into a conversation about this stuff, my brain imagines my Google Calendar and I get so overwhelmed. How in the world can I do this? I already feel so much tension between getting my work done and spending time with my family. I feel like I'm pulled in 1,000 different directions until there's nothing left of me to give. Maybe you feel that way too sometimes. One major barrier to connection is busyness. It's so real. The economic pressures of our culture push us to say yes to more work so that we can play more, so that we have to work more, so that we can play more. And it just escalates and escalates and escalates until we're totally burned out and overwhelmed. And so the only real way to address this is you don't add it to your list of things to do. If adding Find Your People to your to-do list is how we approach connection, Find Your People will always end up at the bottom of the list, and it will be the first thing to go when things get busy. And things will get busy. This has to be integrated into the fabric of our lives. These relationships should arise out of your everyday places, your everyday activities, and that's why proximity is a starting place for intimacy. The only way to have a network, acquaintances, a village, and close friends is if you're actually physically close to people. Now, that's not to say that you can't remain friends or connected to people who don't live in the area, but the general principle here is that you need to actually be around people to build these relationships. Allen says we all need a network of regular people who are present in our daily lives. So think about this. Who do you eat lunch with at work? Like if you're already at work, already eating lunch, can you, for instance, be intentional about who is sitting next to you while you eat? That's part of how we work this into the daily fabric of our lives. Now, this message is going to be full of practical things. Don't feel like you have to get all the details, but try to remember the big picture. And if any of this makes you want to go deeper, you can always pick up the book in our micro bookstore. So here are some of the practical tips that Allen offers in the book on how to build a lifestyle that's characterized by proximity to our people. Step 1, notice who is already right in front of you. Step 2, put yourself out there. And step 3, start great conversations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining each of these steps, but I think they're helpful to see laid out in this way. The point here in these 3 steps is to be thoughtful and intentional. Step 1 is about thinking through the people you interact with in all different parts of your life, in your work, in your neighborhood, in your gym, or a book club. Where do you see people? Who are they? And of those people, who are you interested in getting to know really well? You might even want to map it all out or make lists of all the people you see in different categories of your life. Step 2 is about initiating. Most likely you will need to be the person to pursue a relationship. Sure, you can wait around for other people to initiate with you, but you might be waiting forever. Take the first step. Step 3 is about preparing ahead of time with good questions. Pastor Tom is one of the people I know who does this really well. He always seems to have conversation cards or a cube that has prompts on each side or something. You don't have to write the questions, but find some that will help you get started. These steps boil down, again, to being thoughtful and intentional. In the New Testament, the writer of Hebrews reminds us to think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. It's so important for us to be with each other, for us to spend time together, for us to meet together and encourage each other. We can't miss out on that. In another part of our New Testament, the writer of Acts describes the first people who gathered together as followers of Jesus. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity. The point here, for our purposes, is not necessarily that they gathered in the temple, what we would call the church, every day, but that they were in each other's homes. They shared their meals together. This is like getting together regularly to eat with each other. And I think to do this, maybe we need to lower our standards by a lot. This is definitely not about impressing each other with how well we cook or how clean our homes are or how impressive our homes are. This might be about cheap pizza and paper plates. The goal is to spend time together and being realistic with yourself about how to make that happen. In the last few years of my family's time in North Carolina, Nathan and I hosted what we called Open Table. Our goal was to get people together who were looking for connection. It was a weekly potluck meal. We typically provided the main dish or a theme, and then everyone else chipped in. And I knew the only way to make it work would be if people helped me cook and clean. I couldn't handle all the prep and clean up myself. So every week, people stayed and helped me wash and dry dishes. And you know what? That just extended the time of connection. Those are precious memories, both for Nathan and I, but also for our kids. When you prioritize proximity in those ways, and you're willing to let people in to help you, a byproduct of that is increased transparency. And that's our second goal for connection. But before we get to that, let's take a moment to pause for another chat question. When you think about the circles of people in your life, who are some specific people you would like to build a deeper connection with? Take a minute, write it down, talk about it. So our second step on the path of connection is transparency. This is another one of those simple but not easy things, you know? Transparency is simple in concept. Just pull the layers back, let people see the real you, let people see where you're struggling and where you need help. Choose to let people in. All those people that you're pursuing with great conversations, you probably ought to be ready to answer the same questions you're asking them, right? Why does it feel so hard, so risky to do that? Well, we have two major barriers to transparency. First, we hide because of pain. We've experienced pain in the past, and our gut instinct is to protect ourselves from experiencing that same pain in the future. You've opened up to a friend and they used what you shared to hurt you. You've drawn close to a group of friends and then realized that you were on the outside of that group. You felt judged because you didn't meet some standard. You invited and shared and put yourself out there, and then when you needed something, no one was there for you. This is really tough. And it's safer to stay on the surface, to stay behind our walls. But the thing is that vulnerability is the soil for intimacy. And what waters intimacy is tears. It's the gut-wrenching, tough times that actually grow connection. Alan says we must risk pain to have this kind of deep connection in our lives. And the second major barrier to transparency is this: we hide because of shame. I think shame is the way that our minds process that pain. It's like the story we tell ourselves about pain. And that story is that the reason transparency is hard and that people have used our vulnerability against us is because there's something wrong with us. Shame is the narrative that I'm unlovable, that something is broken in me that makes connection difficult. It isn't enough to feel alone. We then feel guilty that it's our fault. And then the shame of that leads us to hide behind walls and protect ourselves from more hurt. If you're in that space right now, I hope you're able to offer compassion to the parts of you that are trying to protect you. It's not a bad thing that your mind and body want to protect you. That instinct can lead you to be discerning about the people you tell the most vulnerable parts of your story and where and how you tell them. But sometimes that self-protective instinct goes into overdrive, and it can keep you from even considering the risk with even the most safe people. Sometimes when I spiral in that space where my body is trying to protect me from something, but I can see that it's something I want to do, I'll even talk to myself. I'll say, thank you, self, for trying to protect me. I'm ready to take this risk. I'm able to handle whatever comes next in this relationship. And I can remind myself that for whatever part of me, part of this is actually my fault. Like if there are ways that I've distanced myself or hurt people, the Apostle Paul reminds us in his letter to the church in Rome that there's now no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. We can find forgiveness for the ways that we've hurt people and begin to repair them. We can forgive others and also forgive ourselves. And we can even be transparent about that whole process, because to be fully loved requires being fully known. This can only really be accomplished with a few close people. Not everyone can fully know you, but you can and should have a few close people who know you really well. And this requires making transparency a way of life. Now, you should expect that this is going to be awkward. Given how superficial most of our lives are, it's very difficult to move past the surface into deeper connection without it being kind of clumsy at one point or another. So one way to try to move deeper with someone you sense might be a safe person is to plan a get-together, well, where you'll be mostly uninterrupted. Let your friend know ahead of time that you plan to go deep. Say something like, I want to share some things that are going on in my life right now. Or you could say, can we talk about what's really going on in our lives tonight? And then you're probably going to have to take the lead. Just like we talked about with proximity, transparency requires you to initiate. When you share it first, it will set the tone for other people to know how deep to go. When in doubt, remember your small group covenant guidelines, like resist the urge to solve each other's problems, keep it confidential. Sometimes it helps to let the other person know how much you appreciated that back and forth. Like, don't leave them to guess how you're feeling, just tell them. And then do it a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. This is a way of life. It's not an event. And it's worth coming back to over and over and over, because it's not good for the human to be alone. So our first step in the path to connection is proximity. Our second step is transparency. And our third step is accountability. Now, in a lot of ways, transparency and accountability are two sides of the same coin. But before we jump into that, let's pause for a final chat question. What comes to mind for you when you think about accountability? Take a minute and talk about it. Think about it. When you think about the word accountability, do you cringe? Do you want to crawl into a hole and hide? Or does it make you excited to imagine becoming the best version of you possible? These different impressions can stem from our past experiences and our understanding of what accountability means. At its core, according to Allen, accountability calls us to who we were meant to be, through truth mixed with grace. Every week I get together with Pastors Tom and Mark. Those mornings we start with a check-in to see how we're doing, and then we preview an upcoming sermon and we give each other feedback, and then we get to our task list. That check-in might be one of the most important parts of our Wednesdays, and that's why we start with it. It's an opportunity for each of us to share with the others how we're doing in our relationships, in our physical health, in our mental health, in our spiritual lives. We're pretty vulnerable with each other. There's a high level of transparency in what we share, and then we'll ask each other questions. We'll offer other perspectives. We'll say things like, "Can you ask me about this next week?" And that's the accountability part. And I'll mention that this has been a relatively new experience for me. Tom and Mark are not only my colleagues, but they're also my close friends. If you do wind up reading Allen's book, you might notice that she tends to write as if these close relationships only happen with people of the same gender. But I don't think that has to be true. Things might be less straightforward and require more frequent check-ins when close friendships involve members of the opposite gender. Like, for instance, do we talk about sex? But there is something rich that we might miss out on when we refuse to even entertain the possibility of having close friends of the opposite gender. At its best, accountability can be inspiring. A major barrier we have to accountability is pride. We sort of chafe at the idea of receiving correction or submitting to someone, in part because those words and those ideas have been misused for the sake of control. Accountability has been used for shame and for abuse and for manipulation. But this is about becoming who God has made us to be. This is not so much about other people forcing us to behave a certain way. It's more about us showing up for our lives with authenticity. It's about healing and growth. So let's talk about some of the benefits of accountability. Accountability makes us more effective. A writer of Proverbs says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." Accountability calls us to live better. It calls us to live in a way that is consistent with our own values and desires for our lives. Accountability challenges us to reach higher. Accountability challenges us to dream bigger dreams and challenge ourselves. Accountability is one of those things that no one thinks they want. And when it's done in a heavy-handed way, you probably don't want it. But when you experience accountability when it's at its best, you begin to crave it. You recognize how important it is to be challenged by people who know you and love you. Consider this. Who in your life has wisdom and invitation to speak into your life? And do they have the opportunity to speak? Do you hear from them? I know this is breaking the rules a little bit, but one of the people who plays this role in my life is a long-distance friend I keep up with on Marco Polo. Crystal and I are constantly asking each other questions to understand and offer other perspectives and challenge one another. Recently, we were talking about her career, and she was asking herself if she was letting people down by not pursuing something more in her career. And I said, I'm more interested in what would be letting yourself down. And that simple comment led her to go and ask herself that very question. It gave her direction and discernment to identify her own next steps. I mentioned that Tom and Mark play this role in my life as well. Every week, we speak into each other's lives. Now, a quick side note, we play this role for each other and for close friends, and it's just impossible for us to play this role for everyone here. So as you're considering the people in your life who might play this role, I would encourage you to rule your pastor out. Now, just like this proximity and transparency, accountability requires that you be intentional and thoughtful. So here are some steps that you can take to pursue accountability. Step 1, invite a trusted friend to speak truth to you. Be explicit and frequent in your invitation. And remember that not everyone has a helpful perspective. Not everyone has taken the time to know you. Step 2, don't settle for surface level. Don't settle for nice. Expect people to be awkward and direct. And step 3, diversify your circle. Don't surround yourself with people who look and think and act just like you. Make sure that you have people in your circle who have different life experiences. When it does come time to offer a word of correction, it's important for us to do that gently. Consider what the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Galatia. Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path. This is hard, costly work that is so rewarding. Almost certainly there will be setbacks. There will be moments of pain, moments when you realize that you trusted the wrong person and you have to start over. There will be moments when your trust is betrayed, and there will be moments of learning and growth. In my university experience, I was often overbearing. I took all these ideas and I thought I needed to apply them to everybody. I thought I needed to be this person for all of my friends. I didn't ask them what they wanted. I didn't check in to see if this was what they had in mind for our relationship. And I hurt people, and I got hurt. And I also learned how sweet it is to have a group of people to spend time with, to do life with, to be silly with. You will have those moments too. Moments of hurting someone and being hurt. And at each of those moments, we'll be faced with a choice. I can choose on one hand to protect myself by isolating, choosing to live a solitary life, or I can choose on the other hand to take time to heal and then risk again, acting in hope that it is possible to build a community with a few close friends, a village, and a network. I pray that today you feel able to take that risk. I pray that you feel ready to take a step toward finding your people by connecting with someone from your current circles, or by expanding your circles through something like small groups. Remember that it's not good for the human to be alone. This will take work. It will take you being thoughtful and intentional. And as you live into this, as you experience what community can really be, as you experience the truth that it isn't good for you to be alone, I believe that you will be even more motivated to take these steps to find your people.